Welcome to the 10X Game Changer podcast with Rishon Blumberg and Michael Solomon, authors of the new book, Game Changer, How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy. 10X Talent brings at least 10 times the value to your organization. In this podcast, you'll hear real-world stories about how companies can attract, retain, and manage these highly skilled individuals and how the talent themselves can find the most fulfillment. Whether you're the talent, manager, or both, you're in the right place to start experiencing the rewards of becoming 10X.
Welcome to the 10X Game Changer podcast. I'm Rishon Blumberg, your co-host and co-founder of 10X Management, Brickwall Management, and 10X Ascend, along with my co-host Michael Solomon. This is a podcast where we do a deeper dive with some of the people that we interview in our book, Game Changer, How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself and our awesome guest today?
So as Rishon said, I'm Michael Solomon. I am also the co-founder of 10X Management, 10X Ascend, and Brickwall Management, as well as the co-founder of Musicians on Call and a few other nonprofit endeavors that I'm super proud of. We're thrilled today to be talking to longtime friend and client Bryan Bishop, who is remarkably interesting and diverse in the work that he does. It's really interesting because he has these multiple facets and multiple disciplines that he works in, and he's sort of known in the world for both of them, and most people don't necessarily realize that he crosses over to the other parts, which I think is quite a surprise for some people who, come in the door thinking Bryan is this, world-renowned blockchain cryptocurrency expert, Bitcoin expert, and then they learn that he's also doing all kinds of DIY biohacking projects that are really interesting and potentially groundbreaking. Rather than my butchering it, I want to introduce Bryan and welcome him and ask that you share a little bit about some of the projects you're working on, including your recent new job.
Hey, thank you, Michael. So my name is Bryan Bishop, and my background is primarily in software engineering. I've been working with Michael at 10X for close to 7 years now, and it's been really interesting and happy to talk about that. My background is largely on back-end web application development, but I've done full stack. I've gone from front ends, back ends, database, all sorts of work. In particular, though, I also have an interest in biotech, and happy to talk about some of those projects and how those work. And over the past few years, I've also gotten pretty deeply involved in Bitcoin development, working on things like Bitcoin Core, and then also custodial solutions for various companies. And recently, I joined Avanti as CTO. It's a new bank based out of Wyoming that focuses on both U.S. banking and also digital asset custody.
For those not initiated, that's cryptocurrency, among other things. And am I right that this will be the first U.S. regulated bank to do that?
Yeah, I think that's right. There are other banks that can offer U.S. banking to cryptocurrency companies, but as far as my understanding goes, they cannot currently offer custody of crypto assets.
Yeah, that's pretty groundbreaking, and kudos to Wyoming for being the leader on allowing that legally. In the interest of going a little bit deeper on some of the other projects you're working on, I would love for you to share, because part of when we talk about 10Xers, we think of people who are super capable, particularly in one discipline, but most of the time we run into 10Xers. They can apply their 10Xness to anything they want to work on. And there's no one I think of more quickly when it comes to that diverse background of projects than you. So I want to talk a little bit about, there's 3 DIY bio projects that come first to mind. One's particularly current, and the other 2 you've been working on for a while. And then we can move into talking about some other topics as well.
So one of my biotech projects is based around the concept of DNA data storage, and my method is patent pending. The idea is that we can store information on DNA molecules, and I found out a way to do this very cheaply and effectively compared to all the other methods out there. And the idea here is that we're running out of space for data. We're going to have so much data, and we're going to have a limited amount of data storage capacity. DNA is one opportunity for us as a society to have substantially more data storage capacity.
That's amazing. And what are some of the use cases for that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that the primary consumption of data storage is cat pictures on the internet. But there's all sorts of things that we can, data is everywhere in our civilization. Every aspect of our lives is touching data, whether that's family photos, cat pictures, maps, bioinformatics, data about, from neuroscience, from experiments.
As a layperson, how do you access that data when you want to use it? So let's say you're able to store it there, which it sounds like you believe can be done. Then how does one access it?
So all of the DNA data storage methods, including mine, are currently based around the concept of cold storage. And so it can be thought of more like tape drives. And so this is for data that you do not have to frequently access. It's not like your hard drive.
Right. So it's like archival. You could request it, but you can't just immediately access it from your phone or your cloud.
Right. That's right. You can request it from your phone or from your cloud, but it'll take a while.
Right.
Yeah, the advantage of DNA is that it has an amazing half-life of at least 500 years, and that's at like room temperature. So DNA has the potential to provide a storage modality that can last centuries, unlike other data medium.
That's impressive.
Right. Wow, it's super, super interesting. So let's change gears a little bit here. By the time we started working together, you were already what we would consider to be a world-class supercoder and web developer. What was it at the time, this is I guess 7 years ago or so, what was it that sort of convinced you that the offering that 10X Management had was worth you signing on? Obviously, aside from our winning personalities and good looks, like what was it that was appealing to you about this concept?
For me, at the time, I was actually looking for a partner like Michael. And, at the time I was aware that some people use lawyers for that, for negotiation and assistance like that. But, it was basically that my expertise is programming, not necessarily negotiation, although I've certainly become better over time.
Yes, you have.
Thanks to Michael. But still, the realization, though, is that when you're heads down programming all the time, it's a very different mindset to pick your head up and do negotiation. It's a totally different mindset. And in order to keep doing good work, you need to stay in that mindset for programming as long as possible. That's basically how that works. And so, given the opportunity, I took it.
So I have an interesting question. One of the concepts that we have in the book is called the double hat world. And the concept is essentially that everybody who is aspiring or who is 10X needs to be able to shift gears between being the manager and being managed. And part of the importance of this is recognizing that even if you're at the top of the food chain, you still should get guidance from a third party. Now that you're back in a CTO role, do you want to talk a little bit about what it means to wear both of those hats? I know you're only about a month into this new role as of the day that we record this. So let's just sort of tease this out a little bit. I think in a lot of ways, even some of the things you've already started talking about in terms of hiring people, you've started to use different muscles, both because now you're negotiating on behalf of the company, cutting deals with new employees that you're hiring to your team. And also you're going to start managing these people and figuring out how to give them all the things that they need to give you what you're looking for out of them as employees. And I think that that's where sort of the EQ and the IQ pieces come in. Or obviously it's I would imagine it's very easy for you to determine the IQ, but when you're evaluating these new candidates that you're looking at, how are you looking at whether you think they're going to, be people who will throw a tantrum the first time they get negative feedback? And also, how will they fit with the culture of the organization?
Well, on the front of culture, I think that's a really interesting question. So I don't consider this to be mandatory for Avanti, for example. But one of the things that is just a consequence of our reality is that we're not quite Bitcoin maximalist, but we certainly come from the Bitcoin community. And so it's kind of interesting from a cultural standpoint that the Bitcoin maximalism standpoint has a wide spectrum. And it gets really interesting. There are people here who think that Bitcoin is a more ethical, more responsible form of financial asset, and that, it is unethical to have people sell Bitcoin because, what are you selling it for? It would have to be something else that doesn't have the same properties. And so on the other hand, there's even more extreme where, some people think, well, there really shouldn't be any services around any other financial asset in the world. And it's just quite interesting. And I think there's this interesting trend of like a cypherpunk background that I'm really fascinated by, and I'm looking forward to like weaving that in with, frankly, the regulations and compliance that we are ultimately held up to.
Yeah, I think that's actually going to be a really interesting task for you as someone who sort of comes from a little bit of anti-establishment mindset, now working in a highly regulated industry. And I realize you've done it before.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about anti-establishment. I know that's pretty interesting. I joined LedgerX back in 2014, and LedgerX was going to be, and it was, the first CFTC-regulated Bitcoin options exchange and clearinghouse. There was a very extensive licensing process to get to that point. And, at the time, it was a little weird stepping into that role because on the one hand, Bitcoin is, generally, at the time, it was unregulated. And I was joining a heavily regulated company. So, how do you have that on one side and regulation on the other? But it turned out it worked out pretty well. I mean, it turns out that Bitcoin can be used in finance. It can be compatible with certain regulations and compliance. And there is a way to work together. And not only that, but I think it is imperative that we do so to allow people around the world to have access to this kind of financial asset.
And it also seems like you're working on some projects that will help not necessarily make Bitcoin more secure, but give the Bitcoin owner some fallback measures if, for example, they lose their key, which I think is in its own way a little bit of regulation as well. It's providing sort of a security methodology so that you or somebody, I guess you proxy to, could recover something or prevent fraud from happening. It seems like it's mature. That's a maturity issue in the blockchain world.
Well, at Avanti, one of the things that we're focused on is custodial services, and that's absolutely a priority. However, you might also be referring to a recent project that I just released and was on CoinDesk the other day with regards to vaults.
Yeah.
And vaults was an interesting project based around the concept of giving an opportunity to have a clawback period in the event of a theft. And so the idea is that you split up your money into 100 different buckets, and each bucket has something called a time lock, a relative time lock, such that the first bucket's available on day one, second bucket available on day two, and so on. And the idea is that if you see someone steal the first bucket, you have an emergency procedure for transferring all the other buckets to cold storage, to some other storage system. This is based around the principle that in Bitcoin, the only way to know when an asset is going to really be stolen is to observe the theft occurring right from under you. And so you definitely need these time locks to be able to take advantage of some sort of reaction period.
Is that a manual process or is that an automated process?
Well, what I've built out and released is source code for some automation around that, but it's just a prototype right now, currently seeking feedback and review from other developers.
Okay. So Bryan, we consider you to be the prototypical 10Xer, and we talk a lot in the book about the different qualities of a 10Xer. But from your perspective, and also somebody who probably has to bring partners on and or hire people, how would you define a 10Xer? And feel free to sort of give us a broad concept here beyond just sort of technical chops. Give us your perspective on what a 10Xer means.
I don't know if there's any single definition for 10Xer, but there's definitely a lot of qualities and traits that I look at when I'm assessing whether someone is a 10Xer. And a lot of that has to do with productivity, but it also has to do with, like, for example, clarity of thought, the ability to look at a problem and instantly know which architecture to use to solve it, and then to have a very clear idea of how to rapidly go and develop that. Another interesting property, though, is wisdom to know when more source code is not a good thing. Sometimes the trick is actually removing things from a problem and ignoring them instead of just solving everything in the world. It's that insight that I look for.
Just to dig in a little deeper on that, when you think about the non-technical elements of what it means to be a 10Xer, do you have a sense when you interview somebody beyond like their technical chops, what's needed for them to be able to perform at the level that you want them to?
Well, I think beyond just technical chops, it is clarity of thought that is probably most important. Yeah, it's productivity, clarity of thought, the energy to go after the problems and get the solutions made.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we get into a lot is both the ambition, but also the willingness to listen and solicit and take feedback, because I feel like one of the ways that people continue to improve is by finding where are their blind spots, what else can they do to make things better. And I certainly feel like in our relationship, we've that's gone in both directions for us in terms of getting and giving feedback that have made us better at our respective roles. And I always feel like that's part of what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing and when I'm evaluating, both a client or an employee. Is that something you find as well?
It doesn't just apply to 10Xers, though. It also applies to other individuals, like even junior developers. I often tell them, look, here's what companies are looking for. They are looking for people willing to do the following things. And if you do these 3 things, these 3 projects, and you go into an interview and you're able to talk about these 3 things, you will be hired. It's that simple. A lot of it is willingness to show up, willingness to do some of the work. In particular, one of the things I'm thinking about here is like DevOps, for example. I can do DevOps. It's not my preference. It depends. Different people have different preferences. Some people are like, I only do DevOps. I won't do other things. But that is something like that I mentioned to the more junior people is just having a clear concept of what people are looking for really goes a long way.
That makes sense. And this is actually, this follow-up question is sort of in relating to that. 10Xers are essentially in a constant state of evolution and improvement. Do you feel like there's things you're working on right now and new skills you're learning that you're, sort of like always, you have a continuous to-do list of things you want to get to and learn?
Look, I'm constantly learning. There's always new software projects to try out, new languages to try. And also it's like, there's always like this itch that you have to scratch, some new project, something that I just like, is that even possible to do? Can I do it that way? That's definitely one part of like continuous learning, I guess. And then the other part is management concepts, skills, things like that, which is part of my new role, of course.
Good. I hope our book will be useful if you can bear reading about yourself along the way.
We're in the era of 10X talent, where businesses large and small are only as good as their very best players. The exceptionally talented matter more than ever, and they know it. Is your company 10X ready? Take a quiz now to see how you measure up. Go to GameChangerTheBook.com or text GameChanger, one word, to 474747. Plus, get a preview of the new book, Game Changer, How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy by Michael Solomon and Rishon Blumberg. That's GameChangerTheBook.com or text GameChanger, one word, to 474747.
One of the lessons that we talk about frequently in the book, especially because the book really uses technology and the world of technology sort of as a backdrop for, or a canary in the coal mine for the rest of business that gets done, is this idea that for your core assets, the people that are making the most impact on your company, they need to be 10Xers or they need to be actively striving to be 10Xers. So the question I guess I have for you is, when you're looking at partners, whether it's this new job, this new CTO role that you're starting, or other kinds of partners, what are some of the signals that you look for that either are green lights for you, like, okay, I can really partner with these people, or what are some red flags that you see?
Yeah, I mean, what I usually look for, as I mentioned before, is like clarity of thought, but then there's also things like trajectory, for example. What is the trend? What have they worked on in the past? And, are they in a positive upward trend? Are they stagnant? That can be okay, but it's worth considering in the whole package. I mean, I'm definitely interested in working with people who are always learning and improving and trying out new things, experimenting. That's really important for just, being innovative, doing business.
Without putting you on the spot and without you naming names or revealing things that might be issues, is there something that stands out in your mind of an opportunity that came your way that you maybe didn't catch the signs that this was a problem project, and then you realized quickly, all right, this is a no-go? How did you sort of recognize that, and what were those elements that sort of popped up for you, and how did you gracefully get out of that, or did you gracefully get out of that?
So the question is basically about bad projects. So in consulting, you never really know what you're getting. You have someone coming to you with a project and you talk with them for a bit, but who really knows what the project really is, or what its quality is, or its status is? And so usually the way that this works is that there's usually some trial period or something, or some architecture phase or requirements gathering phase, where I go in and look and just see what's actually going on, how are things currently being run, And then I have to assess things like, well, how much of that can I change? Or is this already in motion, has a lot of inertia or something like that? Yeah, I've definitely gracefully bowed out of a few projects before, for sure.
Similar question, but when you're interviewing somebody for a role at a project you're working on where you're in the hiring seat, what are some of the red flags that jump out at you? And I don't mean somebody failing a code test, that's sort of an obvious one, but somebody who seems like they have the technical chops, but your spidey sense says this is not going to be a good fit.
Well, honestly, there's two main things that I look at. One is the ability to talk about programming and how that process works, how the person chose to go about solving certain problems. But then there's also looking at source code. I think it gives a great window into the mind about how people think about things, to look at source code, how they organize it, what sort of thinking goes into it. It's really a form of crystallized thinking. That's really the best way to describe programming.
Do you ever ask somebody to sort of defend code? Have you ever been looked at a code and you were like, I don't understand why you did it this way, and they defend it in a way that you're like, okay, that opened my eyes to something?
Code review is a critical part everywhere. I absolutely insist on it, and I do challenge people about why they chose to do things in certain ways when it's non-standard or otherwise not in line with what we've previously been doing. Absolutely. Code review is how we check for bugs. It's how we keep on top of things. I also think it's important for the majority of the team members to have a good understanding of the whole system, not just the parts they're working on.
So a lot of what we talk about in this book are various forms of vision that become relevant for any leader and any manager. And, it's very clear you have a lot of vision, hence you're being so early into the Bitcoin world and any number of other examples, including the biology projects we talked about earlier. When you think about sort of your vision for the future and the things you want to go after, and there's going to be pushback on it, like, certainly the germline engineering, I think, is an obvious one to talk about in this. How do you overcome that? Like, how do you just plow forward knowing that that's going to be extremely controversial and even potentially impact, how people think of you in non-biology circles? Like, that's a bio project, but that has the potential for people to think of you differently for blockchain work that you do.
Well, there's certainly an aspect of public attention in media that has to be considered. But, in practice, though, when you get down to it, there are good technical reasons for doing things certain ways, good proposals for biotech and just interesting projects to work on that anyone with skill in the art will say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. On the technical side, it's not really controversial. There's certainly unknown questions, unknown answers to questions. And, I certainly admit that there's a lot that we don't know about biology. But there are some things that we do know. And, as a society, we've actually been ignoring a lot of that because it's been a bit of an icky subject, just something taboo, something we wouldn't rather talk about. But, the interesting thing there is that I see it as an opportunity. And, it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. And I think everyone needs some sort of mission or some sort of passion that they hyper-focus on. I think that's really important for having a meaningful life.
You gave some interesting advice without even necessarily knowing you were doing it. Our listeners may be junior coders, people that are interested in learning about how to improve and grow from a 5X to a 10Xer. If you had to give some clear advice to a junior coder about the things that they should be doing to sort of increase their capability beyond perhaps the language that they're proficient in, what would be some specific advice you would give to a junior coder about how to 10X themselves?
Probably the biggest piece of advice would be mentorship. Find someone significantly more experienced than you who is brilliant and hang out around them. You basically absorb this knowledge from people, and you want to be around people that are in that position to give you that leg up, basically. Yeah, pick your team carefully, find mentors. Absolutely.
We're firm believers in that. Here's a question, and I'm intentionally going down this road. So let's say you're a junior coder based in somewhere in Iowa. You're working on a project. Maybe you're working for a company remotely. How do you find a mentor? Are there some places or some things you would recommend someone do to seek out mentors?
Yeah, so the way that mentorship in programming works is usually you can get this through like open source projects, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can also find people that are willing to mentor on private projects, of course. But usually it's through open source projects, and so you volunteer some of your time or something in your after hours, and sometimes you can get paid for this, by the way, increasingly so in the Bitcoin space, for example. There are organizations paying for open source development as kind of a stipend. And then basically you find someone and you say, hey, I'm really interested in learning. I'm interested in keeping up. Loop me into things. Assign me a task. Here's my skills and abilities. Is this a good fit? And sometimes and often they'll say, no, it's not a good fit, and you should go find another project, of course.
It's almost like a traditional sort of internship where you're seeking out opportunities to prove yourself, and by proving yourself, people will potentially take you on, sort of mentor you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When you think about the people who have mentored you and played that third party point of view to help you see blind spots and help you evolve and help you get better at what you do, besides assuming I've done that, yours truly, who else plays that role in your life, and sort of what's the relationship like? And maybe if you could even give sort of like the most valuable non-technical piece of wisdom that was imparted to you by that person.
Well, that's a big ask. Okay, so I'll answer in two ways. One is starting with a story of one of the first mentors that I had. It was a long time ago. The year was like 2002. I was 12 years old, and someone actually taught me programming over the internet. Some guy, don't know who he is to this day, can't find him, have no idea who he is, but he taught me. And he just spent weeks and weeks and weeks through chat helping me figure out how programming actually works. I had so many questions, and I knew some of the details, but I didn't really understand what was going on. I mean, after all, I was 12 years old.
Did he drive a white van?
No, it was just someone on the internet. I mean, look, this is how the internet used to work. You would just randomly find people. Now everything is like through these silos like Facebook and Instagram.
Oh, it still works that way, unfortunately, for some people.
Another perspective that I really appreciate is from Peter Thiel. And he likes to ask, what is your 10-year plan, and why can't you do that in 6 months? It's just such an interesting question.
That is an interesting question.
That's really good. That is really good. So much along the same lines of mentorship and learning from other people, the other way that we all learn very religiously and don't always love, but it is still a great way of learning, is through failure. And I love the way the technology industry sort of adopted failure as a badge of honor and a way of showing that you've been through things and you've learned things and you're better than you would have been if you hadn't failed. Is there something that comes to mind when we talk about failure in your professional life that is sort of like a big obvious moment of like, wow, I really learned a lot on that particular foible?
Absolutely. Two things come to mind. One is when I was much younger, I was just starting out in consulting. It was before I met you guys. And I had one primary client, and I took on a second client. And the second client was unhappy with my timeliness. And it was just a huge wake-up call that I needed to organize myself a little bit better. And basically that has never happened again since then.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call, and I was like, you know what, you're right. I need to be better than this. So I made sure that got fixed. The other aspect of failure that I could talk about is with regards to a mobile ad technology / company that I was trying out. And I'm a little hesitant to talk about it because it was quite interesting on the technical side, of course. I basically spent a whole bunch of time developing the system to download all Android apps and all iPhone apps, and then to analyze them for ad SDKs. And then I was able to figure out which ads were displaying in each app. And I was going to sell this data, basically. I was going to have some sort of business around this. And I spent so much time developing the technology around it, and it worked. And I did a whole bunch of reverse engineering, all sorts of interesting stuff. Totally failed on the business front. I didn't even bother to look whether there were customers that would be interested in this data. And one of the lessons I took from that failure was that given who I am and what my expertise is, namely on the technical side, that I should heavily weight myself in favor of businesses in existing industries that already have markets established. It's just a bias I have, is that I naturally gravitate towards things that don't quite exist yet. But in practice, from a business perspective, it actually would make more sense to go into active markets.
It's interesting. I can see the value in both. I feel like I need to super qualify your first answer about getting organized from that first mistake, because Bryan is one of the most organized people I have ever worked with or observed. He's known to transcribe conversations in real time. So all of a sudden we get off a call that was a very long, hour-long call with somebody, and Bryan then emails a transcript of the entire conversation because he is a world-renowned speed typist, and transcribes the call in real time and then sends it to everyone on the call. But not only that, he maintains a database of all of these calls so that he can rapidly find any information previously discussed. So when we are talking about, oh, that deal from 4 years ago, he's like, let me look. And it's instant. I mean, I consider myself really organized, but it's a whole different level with somebody like Bryan. So that was a lesson that you learned and then overachieved on. You 10x'd that lesson for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the typing thing, interesting backstory. I've always typed pretty quickly. People ask me all the time, why am I so fast? How did I get that fast? The answer I give is a bit of a joke. I say, I learned to type quickly by arguing on the internet. As long as you can get your arguments out fast enough, you win the argument.
I've never heard you say that before. That's awesome.
Yeah. But no, I've been also doing that for conferences for, over 10 years now. And that's all available on my website for all the conference transcripts as well. But now that I'm transitioning into the CTO role, I'm actually trying to find some people to take on that work for me. And I believe that will be occurring on bitcointranscripts.org shortly.
Oh, is that a new entity that exists?
Someone is putting that together. Yeah, I'm trying to pawn this off, but it's very hard to find someone who can type this quickly and is willing to travel to all these conferences.
Can't you just record them and then have them transcribed?
You could, but a lot of it is extremely technical information, and you end up having to edit the transcripts anyway, and It ends up taking about the same amount of time.
Right. Well, going back to what you were talking about with failure and sort of organizing yourself and the expectations, we talk a lot in the book about how important it is to gain trust through setting expectations and then meeting or exceeding them, and how important trust is. And I think that your example is a great example of where that trust breaks down. When you aren't able to meet the expectations of what you have with your client, or what has either been expressed or not been expressed, trust starts to break down and then projects go sideways. So I think that that's a great example, talking about other things that we've touched on in the book. So thank you for telling that story.
As a consultant, the whole name of the game is set low expectations and then come in and exceed them, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We are big fans of that.
Not necessarily setting low expectations, but set expectations you absolutely can do, and then try and over-deliver on that.
That's right. Under promise, over deliver.
Bingo. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you in the ether for listening to our 10X Game Changer podcast. And we look forward to being with you on our next segment.
You know if you're a 10Xer, but do you know if you're experiencing all the rewards and satisfaction that should come with it? Find out with the new book, Game Changer, How to Be 10X in the Talent Economy by Rishon Blumberg and Michael Solomon. Start reading now for free at GameChangerTheBook.com. That's GameChangerTheBook.com.